Welcome to the Detroit Lions Morning Rounds. I'm Jimmy Liao, University of Michigan Medical School graduate, lifelong Lions fan. Today, let's talk a little bit about the COVID news over the past week, as well as a quick Game 6 preview and things to watch out for. So, COVID, the big news for me was the CDC redefine close contacts. Previously, it was defined as being within 6 feet of a COVID positive for 15 straight minutes. They changed it to 15 minutes cumulative over 24 hours. So it can be intermittent contact over 24 hours. Will this affect the NFL at all? Possibly. It could affect how they handle practices and what kind of practices they have. It might decrease the amount of padded practices or high contact practices. Previously, you could just have close contact for 5-10 minutes, break it off, come back an hour later, do it again, and it wouldn't count under the CDC guidelines of close contact. However, that won't be true at this point. So we'll see how consistent and closely the NFL decides to follow these CDC guidelines. Now, keep in mind with all this COVID stuff is there's no magic to these guidelines. There's no magic to 6 feet, 15 minutes, 24 hours. All risk is along a gradient, and deeming this as higher risk is also just an educated guess by the CDC. Now, the CDC is comprised of good people, very smart people, but they are just guessing, educated in a way that is not hard, definite science with good studies. The CDC and doctors just don't have good data regarding COVID for many situations, and it's because ethically, we're not able to do really good research studies, which are these double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies. We're not able to purposely expose others to COVID, purposely infect others with COVID. We can't do those kind of studies. So the CDC and doctors have to make a guess based on historical data, anecdotal data. So a lot of this is guesswork. Much of what we know now may be proven wrong a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. A lot of the things we are trying to know about COVID, such as the prevalence rate, is really unknown because we're not allowed to randomly sample a portion of the population and force them to get tested for COVID. So we don't even know what the prevalence rate was 6 months ago compared to what it is now. So many unknowns regarding COVID, and that's just the facts of life. That's just the bottom line. So regarding these CDC guidelines, these are educated guesses. They're good guesses, but they're still just guesses. So there's a lot of gray area with all of this. So the NFL can play within this gray area to balance getting games played, getting players into games, and trying to balance that against preventing outbreaks and preventing issues regarding COVID. Other COVID news, a Raiders O-lineman tested positive. This caused the rest of the offensive line starters to be deemed close contacts, and they were held out of practice, but they should be ready to go for this Sunday's game. It was unsure if the offensive line contacts were deemed high-risk close contacts. Now remember, the NFL just changed the COVID policy so that high-risk close contacts must be out a minimum of 5 days. The NFL, to my knowledge, never released what they defined as high risk. So there could be some fudging here. There could be some gray area, case-by-case basis decisions being made here. I'm sure the NFL was not going to bench the entire Raiders starting offensive line and make them play on Sunday. Likewise, they may not want to bench any starting quarterback and deem them high risk if there's any way they can avoid doing that. So behind the scenes, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot of case-by-case determination with all of these players. And I'm fine with that because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of gray area regarding COVID. There's no strict black or white guideline. Like I said, 6 feet is just a guideline. There's no magic. 15 minutes is just a guideline. There's no magic. So a player that's 17 minutes is not that much of a risk difference from a player that was in close contact for 13 minutes. So the NFL has to balance everything as well as try to get the season played on schedule, on time, and finish off the season without too many PR issues. Another news this week was Brandon Williams of the Ravens was out for 5 days due to a household contact who was tested COVID positive. So Brandon Williams himself did not test positive, but because he was in close contact with a household member, the NFL held him out for 5 days. Now, this creates some potentially unintended consequences for NFL players, where household members of these players might not want to get themselves tested because they don't want to test positive and force the player to have to miss a game, which potentially could affect their career. This is similar to the unintended consequence with the domestic violence penalties that the NFL instituted a few years ago. A player accused of domestic violence could be suspended or cut from the team. What this can cause in certain situations is the victim of the domestic violence may not want to publicly call the player out or disclose that there was domestic violence because they don't want the player to lose his salary, lose the money, and lose his job. So there are some unintended consequences that need to be kept in mind regarding holding players out due to a household contact testing COVID positive. Now let's talk about Lions Game 6 preview against the Atlanta Falcons. Big game for the Lions. They can get back to 500, which would be fantastic going forward. Let's talk about injuries for the game. Desmond Trufant, as expected, no practice all week. He's out. I would expect him to be out next week also against the Colts and maybe back for the week after that. Typically, the Lions are pretty conservative as far as injuries. They usually like to have a 2-week ramp up before playing. So the first week, some limited practices, hold them out for that game. Next week, get in 1 or 2 full practices, then they're ready to go. Justin Coleman, good news, was back at practice Thursday. So I was worried that he might be out an extended period of time due to a severe hamstring, potentially 2 months or longer, but it's great news that he's back at practice Thursday. His initial injury was around September 13th, so it's about 6 weeks now. Hopefully he can be back by the 7 or 8 week mark. I'm not expecting him back for this game. Also, other good news, Danny Amendola, who hurt his foot or ankle or something late in the game, worried that something could be serious there, like Alis Frank, like we saw with Amir Abdullah, but no worries here. Full practice for Amendola. He should be ready to go. Joe Dahl, Trey Flowers, Marvin Jones, and Frank Ragnow also full practice, so great news for all of that. Ragnow had what was a groin injury last week, had some limited practices, still played 100% of snaps, so it looks like he's pretty much fully recovered from that. Other good news with the offensive line is that Jonah Jackson, Vitae, and Crosby are not even on the injury report, which means they are good to go. Those guys all played significantly less than 100% of snaps. last week, so there was concern about injury, but potentially it was just a dehydration issue, fatigue issue that caused the rotation and the subbing out. What will be interesting is who is going to be the starting offensive line this week, given that everybody's healthy. Crosby started the season on the bench. He was not a starter. He's been a starter the past couple games due to injuries. So now that Dahl is healthy, Vaitai seems to be healthy. Is Crosby going to go back to the bench? Is Vaitai going to start at right tackle? Crosby's played pretty well at offense tackle, although this last game against the Jags, he slipped a little bit, but maybe that was due to the dehydration issue. Hard to say. Other good news as far as injuries with the Lions is still no ACL or Achilles tears since training camp with Jayron Kearse. There was some worry coming into the season that the lack of OTAs, the cutting short of training camp would cause a spike in severe injuries. We haven't found this to be the case. Definitely not the case with the Lions. So good news overall regarding the severe injuries. COVID and the truncating of the training camp did not seem to cause any issues. The lack of preseason games did not seem to cause any issues and may actually have made things better as far as an injury standpoint. Also, good news is no known COVID cases for the Lions in weeks now. So that's all good news as well. Hopefully that continues. Looks like all the games are on schedule for this Sunday. There's only one Monday night game, so everything is on schedule for this weekend, but we'll keep an eye out for any breaking positive cases over this weekend. So as far as the game itself, one thing I want to talk about is the cornerbacks. Oruwariye has been playing very well for us this year. He was a 5th-round pick for us. Right now, I'm considering him as the second best Bob Quinn pick behind Kenny Golladay, who was a fantastic pick in the 3rd round. Getting Oruwariye, a good starting cornerback in the 5th round, is a steal. That's a gold mine. That is just a fantastic pick. We know that getting cornerbacks, drafting good cornerbacks is very difficult, even in the 1st round. We had Tease Tabor in the 2nd round who flamed out fast. So great to see Oruwariye playing well. Other guys that I want to talk about in the cornerback room are these 4th, 5th stringers who I feel like have played very well this year. Darryl Roberts and Tony McRae. I had to look these guys up because I didn't know who these guys were. Well, Darryl Roberts, he's 29 years old. He was previously with the Jets. He's had a total of 4 interceptions in his career, including one this year. He signed a 1-year, $1 million contract, so a veteran minimum salary with the Lions. Tony McRae is 27 years old, previously with Cincinnati. 3 total interceptions in his career. He also signed a minimum deal, 1 year, $1 million. Both of these guys have played very well, very impressively this year. We've seen over the past few years when we're having to pull these cornerbacks, no-name guys off the street, that it's been a disaster. But these guys have stuck with their guys very well. They've gotten occasional penalties, but it's because they've been so close to their guys. So overall, I've been very impressed with the depth of the cornerbacks. Hopefully, Justin Coleman can be back soon. Hopefully, Okudah can pick up his game because he's still struggling a bit. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with the depth of our cornerbacks. Another guy I want to keep a close eye on is Jayron Kearse, who played 59% of snaps last week. Remember, he missed the first 3 games due to a suspension. He had a huge impact against the Jaguars. This guy was all over the place, playing sort of a safety/linebacker position, sort of like Tavon Wilson played for us the past couple of years and did very well in. Well, Jayron Kearse looks like he's playing that similar kind of role. He blitzed a lot from the linebacker position. He's also a very big guy. He's very tall and pretty big. He looked like a defensive end out there. So he's sort of this hybrid type guy who potentially could play a big role for us going forward. He took over all the snaps from Will Harris, who started the year for us. So our current safety rotation is Tracy Walker and Durang Harmon getting most of the snaps, but Kearse is getting a significant number of snaps as well. All right, so that's the preview. Hoping the Lions pull off a victory against the Falcons this week. Thanks for listening. Feel free to leave any YouTube comments or find me on Twitter at Jimmy Liao MD. Thanks.